Good morning, everyone. Good morning. If we could continue to find our seats, we're going to get started in a moment. I'm a preacher, so this is easy. Good morning. Welcome back to Christ Chapel. I'm Chaplain Bright, and I am the chaplain of the college and the director of religious life. And so I am tasked to welcome you to the memorial service for Reverend Dr. Hammann III. Won't you pray with me? To the God who is with us today, who teaches us to love wisdom, who plants the seeds of our lives in the earth, who lets us see the beauty of this world while we are alive. We thank you for Reverend Dr. Hammann III. Bring to our remembrance the goodness of his life and all that you did for and through him while he lived. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Thank you so much for coming, everyone. My friend Halida is going to play a piece by Franz Liszt called St. Francis de Paul Walking on the Waves. And my father heard this a number of times. And every time he heard it, he said, I want that piece played at my funeral. And it has a story behind it. Correct me if I get it wrong, Halida, but St. Francis of Paul came to a body of water, came to a bay or whatever, and he wanted to cross, but the boatman would not let him cross, wouldn't take him. And so he simply raised his cloak and used it as a sail and walked across the water on the waves. And so if you listen to the piece, it's very evocative. You'll hear the waves, you'll hear the walking. Anyway, thank you, Halida.
That was breathtaking. It's literally hard to speak after hearing music like that. Just beautiful. Good morning. My name is Janet Riggs, and I had the privilege of being both Lou Hammann's student and faculty colleague. And then somehow in 2008, I ended up as the college's president. And Lou was still very active on campus, and in fact, during that period of time, he served very proudly on the college's alumni board. So, although we knew each other over many, many years in a variety of ways, I'm not sure my impression of Lou changed all that much over all of those years. Because as you all know, Lou was Lou. He didn't act any differently as a function of the roles that people happened to be in. He treated other fellow human beings as if we were all on the same journey together. And that is something that I always very much appreciated about Lou Hammann. When the Hammann family, and in particular Diane, asked me to serve as kind of an MC for this memorial service, I balked briefly because I felt a little intimidated by the task. But then Diane said, and I quote, "I suspect that as a college president, you've had lots of experience presiding at events, providing a bit of structure, and moving things along at a reasonable clip, like a typical faculty or a board meeting." So, after I make a few brief comments of my own, I'll be introducing others who will no doubt have more profound things to say than I do. At least that was always the case at faculty meetings. And I trust none of our speakers today will require me to get out the hook to pull them off the stage. I'm guessing that most of you here knew Lou well. Born in 1929 into a working-class family in Baltimore, son of a fishmonger, the first in his family to graduate from high school, a 1951 Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Gettysburg College, Master of Divinity from Yale, a brief stint as a full-time clergyman, back to Gettysburg College in 1956 as a faculty member in what was then the Bible department, earning his master's and PhD along the way, continuing to serve in a variety of interim and part-time pastoral roles, earning the college's highly prestigious Distinguished Teaching Award in 1988, retiring from the college in 1997, but continuing to teach and be a real vibrant presence at the college for many, many years after that. There's probably no course I've heard more praise for from alumni than Lou's Center to the Fringe course, and it's one of my great regrets that I never signed up for that course. And a student's experience in one of Lou's courses was often only the beginning. A hallmark of Lou's career was the deep mentoring relationships he established with his students and maintained long after their graduation. Alumni say things like, "Lou changed my life," or "Lou made me a better person," or "Lou made me realize that I wasn't as smart as I thought I was." And I'm certain today you're going to hear a great deal about those relationships. Outside of the religion department, Lou was instrumental in the development of the management department. Who knew? But he was also central to the college's development of interdisciplinary programs such as Latin American Studies and Global Studies. In fact, the Lou Hammann Award in Interdisciplinary Study was established in his honor and is awarded each year to a senior who's done exemplary work in interdisciplinary studies. And somehow, in the midst of a very busy faculty career and a very busy family life, 5 daughters will keep you quite busy, Lou also made time to coach the Gettysburg men's soccer team and later the women's soccer club. This breadth of Lou's activities, his interest in, enthusiasm for, and curiosity about so many things, religion, philosophy, the larger world, the intersection of disciplines, soccer, justice, humanity, this genuine interest in and curiosity about and engagement with such a variety of topics and activities was another of Lou's greatest hallmarks. And that breadth of thinking, and especially that curiosity, was contagious to all of us, and especially to his students. Meanwhile, the larger community also benefited in some amazing ways from Lou's gifts and interests and persistence. He was founder of AYSO, our local youth soccer organization. He served on a variety of local boards, including the hospital board and the Hammann Home for Youth. And he and Patricia very actively focused their efforts on democracy and justice for all. And with Patricia, he was founder of the Hundredfold Farm co-housing community. Most importantly, Lou was a devoted husband to Patricia and the loving father of 5 daughters, one of whom left this earth far too soon, a father-in-law, and a grandfather. Lou is sorely missed, but he leaves an enormous legacy, and we are here today to acknowledge that legacy and to truly celebrate it. So I'm glad to see you all here today to do that, and at this point, I'd like to introduce our first speakers, Baird Moran, class of 1962, and Ray Truex, class of 1963.
Good morning. I am Baird Moran, and I graduated from Gettysburg College in 1962, so I'm back here all weekend for our 60th reunion. I'm honored to be asked to say a few words here at this ceremony for Lou. As most of you know, or most of you who played soccer anyhow know, that we dedicated some things to Lou here in the name of those of us who played soccer for him. Back last fall or late summer, I forget exactly when it was, but I got an email from Charlie Crossan down here. Charlie Crossan is also class of 62, so we played together. But I got an email from Charlie Crossan, and he said that he thought it would be important for us as soccer players who played for Lou to dedicate something that would be important to him while he was still with us. And in Charlie's contacts with the family, he had learned that perhaps there wasn't that much time left. And so Charlie got some of us together, and we discussed different things that we could do, and we agreed on dedicating a plaque in Lou's honor that would be displayed in the soccer room in the gym. And then someone suggested that maybe we would like to dedicate a tree here on the campus. So you understood that there were some people that were honored by trees, and so we discussed that and decided that if we could get the money, there we go, if we could get the money together, that we would do that. And so we figured out a way to get the money, and we did dedicate a tree. And it's over by the soccer field. So if you ever get an opportunity to go over there and look at it, it's a very pretty tree and a very nice plaque. I was asked to say a few words at that dedication. We had a dedication of the plaques and the tree at a luncheon that Lou and Pat attended back in October. And while I was trying to think of things that I would say, I came to a realization that something that you already know, that Lou was many things to many people. In my own case, of course, he was one of the first professors that I had. I had him for Bible my freshman year. And then I had him for a course with that we called Literary Foundations of Western Civilization. And I learned stuff that I didn't even know existed in that course. But one of the most important things that he did in my life was that he married my wife Joyce and I right here in this chapel in 1962. And that was a very important part of my life. After I graduated, I didn't have a chance to come back to Gettysburg for about 10 years. I was in the Navy, and the Navy just didn't make it convenient to get to Gettysburg College most of the time. But if you fast forward to for 10 years or so, Joyce and I were back here to probably a homecoming event, and I recall we were in a big room with a lot of people. And from way across the room, I heard this voice, very familiar voice that I hadn't heard in a long time, and it was calling, "Baird, Baird." And it was Lou. And he came over, and I hadn't seen him in at least 10 years. But he knew me, and he knew Joyce, and he made himself known. And there were many instances after that where he always came up to us, always said hello, always talked. If you were sitting at dinner, he'd come and sit down with you for a while. He was a good friend. And my relationship with Lou Hammann was unique for me in any of my relationships here at Gettysburg, and very important to me. And I'm very thankful for his friendship. There's one other thing that I want to say about Lou Hammann that I think is a very important thing. We as soccer players, of course, knew how passionate Lou was about the game of soccer. And I think we also knew how much he loved all of us who played for him. But Lou Hammann had another passion, and that passion was for nature and for conservation of the environment. And I went yesterday over to take a look at the tree that we had dedicated to him. And when we did the dedication, the plaque wasn't finished yet, so the plaque wasn't out there. And it is now, of course. But I looked at that tree by the soccer field, and the symbolism of that just amazed me, that there was a living tree to honor Lou Hammann, and it's right by a soccer field. I can't think there's anything that we could have done as soccer players to better say thank you, Lou. So thank you, Lou.
Good morning. My name is Ray Truex. I played varsity soccer at Gettysburg in 1960, 1961, and 1962. And I'm speaking today as a representative for all of the players that played for Lou during the years that he was a coach. We were honored to have Lou as our coach. When I began to think about what I might say today, the Gettysburg alma mater kept coming into my mind for some reason. The lyrics were written a century ago by Paul S. Gilbert, who was a Gettysburg College student. The lyrics, as many of you know, begin, "As softly the evening shadows are veiling the campus towers, we come, a band of good fellows, to sing in the twilight hours." Now, when I was younger, I had a mental image of the sun setting behind the red velvet tower, casting shadows over toward Pennsylvania Hall. But as I've matured, these words have taken on new meaning for me. I see these evening shadows and twilight hours as an allegory for the advancing years in the cycle of life. Coach Lou has been a part of our lives, all of us soccer players, for 60 years. The sun is setting on our twilight hours, and the sun has already set on our beloved coach. We grieve his loss, and we gather today to memorialize his life. In the more recent years, his soccer players have tried to let Lou know how much he meant to us. We honored him, as Baird has said, by giving him several plaques, which are on display in the Bream Wright display cases just off the lobby. We dedicated the tree to him, as Baird has just said, and we initiated a Zoom conference call between Lou and all of his players in 2019 during the pandemic. In the plaque that we presented, we honor Lou as teacher, coach, mentor, and friend. Baird has talked today about the friendship that Lou shared with all of us over the years, and I think Steve Nelson, who is going to follow me, will probably say a word or two about teaching and mentorship. So first of all, let me talk about soccer. Lou had had soccer in his DNA. He was introduced to the game of soccer while he was a high school student in Baltimore, and he played in an amateur league on Sundays. When he came to Gettysburg, he played on the varsity soccer team from 1947 through 1950. I'm not sure what position he played. In later years, he was instrumental, as President Riggs said, in establishing the Adams Youth Soccer League. Upon graduation from Gettysburg, Lou went to New Haven and studied at Yale, receiving his Master of Divinity degree, and then came back to join the Gettysburg faculty. In 1960, there was a great deal of turmoil on the varsity soccer team. And at that point, the athletic director, Hen Bream, selected Lou to replace the incumbent coach. To our lasting gratitude, this seemed to be God's plan for both Lou and for us. Looking back, our college years were among the happiest of our lives. During these years, we traversed the threshold from adolescence to adulthood. Lou was our soccer coach, and yet he was only 10 years our senior. So that age proximity allowed us to see ourselves in him and to relate better to him. During scrimmages, he was able to put on his cleats and get out on the pitch and play with us. And he had excellent soccer skills, I might say. He was ever supportive of his players, both as individuals. He was never critical. He was always supportive and encouraging, nurturing, always kind, and always thoughtful. I think for us soccer players, Lou was a model of how an adult should be. He served as our surrogate father while we were away from home, and he helped to shape our character during critical years of our lives. Lou's 1962 team was blessed with excellent players at every position, and also a deep bench. The pinnacle of our success came in the late fall, 60 years ago, when an upstart Bullet soccer team took on a mighty Penn State Nittany Lions soccer team on the soccer pitch. There were students ringing the field. We won that game 2-1, and we considered it a miracle. We all knew that our coach had previously gone to divinity school, and we joked that he probably had a connection with the big referee in the sky. What we have come to understand since our graduation is that Lou was a multidimensional character. He was a magnificent teacher, a gifted intellect, and a scholar. And let's tell the truth here, he was a bit of a free-thinking maverick. He was a Renaissance man. And to him, athletics were a mechanism which enhanced one's intellectual gifts. For his soccer players, scholastic pursuits came first, soccer second. His advice to us was to set a goal and strive to meet it. And if you look in your program today, you will see that he indeed met the goals that he set forth for himself when he was in high school. So let's refer back to our plaque's inscription. And we understand now that teacher was even much more important in describing Lou than coach. Lou was born to be a teacher. He was interested in old books from an early age. At Gettysburg, he majored in Latin, Greek, and philosophy. And he wrote his senior thesis about the Greek elegiac poet Theocritus. I was a science major, that means, that's Greek to me. Okay. Lou was elected to Phi Beta Kappa, and he graduated from Gettysburg magna cum laude. At graduation, Lou won the Hassler Latin Prize and received the Henry W. Hansen Award, which was given to an individual who planned to pursue teaching at the collegiate level. As a young faculty member, he collaborated on the development of the contemporary civilization compendium that was a staple of freshman study for all Gettysburg students. He went on to become the longest active tenured faculty member at Gettysburg, serving the college for 51 years. As President Riggs said, he was presented the coveted Christian Lindbach Award as the outstanding teacher at Gettysburg in 1988. In a poll of 3,600 Gettysburg College alumni in 2014, Lou was voted number 2 on the all-time list of most respected and beloved Gettysburg College professors, behind only Parker Wagnalls. We in the soccer team strongly suspect that there was election fraud perpetrated by the college choir. The other quality I want to recognize about Lou is his dedication to relationships. While he was a faculty member at Gettysburg, he maintained a lifetime contact with his much admired Baltimore Boy Scout troop leader, Andrew Goss, who had inspired in Lou a love of nature and the environment. And during Lou's faculty years, Lou kept in frequent touch with his college mentor, Sheldon Ackney, who had moved on to New York City. It was this type of dedication to maintaining his relationships that led Lou to attend each of my college reunions. I vividly recall him sliding into his seat next to me, giving me an elbow in the ribs and a loving welcome home, then going on to ask about my career and my family. Even after his retirement, Lou could be found sharing coffee and ideas with underclassmen. It was this interest and willingness to connect, in combination with his terrific intellect, that made him such a terrific mentor. Now, we Gettysburgians recognize these words. Whenever thy loyal ones gather to waken fond memory, our thoughts shall be turned alma mater, old Gettysburg, back to thee. These are appropriate sentiments for a reunion weekend. And for this specific day, on which we honor the memory of our wonderful teacher, coach, mentor, and friend, Louis John Hammann III. We remember him with gratitude for a life well lived, for his service to his alma mater, for his diverse interests and his love of intellectual pursuits, for his respect and care of the environment, for his unique ability to mentor college students, and for his contributions to the Adams County community. We express our condolences to Pat and his family and give them our thanks for sharing him with us. We humbly ask that his soul may rest in peace in God's eternal kingdom. Amen.
You may have noticed I am not Steve Nelson, class of 1969. Steve could not be here, but he did send remarks for us to share, and so I have the honor of reading remarks today from Steve Nelson, who was a very devoted student of Lou's and kept in close touch with him over the years. Steve says, I recall a wonderful moment in my relationship with Professor Hammann when in a world religion's final exam, one of his questions was along these lines. I don't want to know what you know, but what you don't know. In the form of a question, state something that you don't know about world religions, and then answer that question in terms of why you don't have an answer and what you would need to know to begin to have an answer. Is that Lou Hammann or what? As the friends, family, students, and colleagues in the Gettysburg family of Lou, we probably think we know everything or almost everything about him. As a community, those gathered here and those others whose lives Lou touched, we have a pretty good sense about who he was, the kind of life he lived, his massive and enduring meaning in the lives of so many. So what is there to say or add? I will venture into that place by way of personal memories and affection for Lou, so inspired by his affection for me, something I am certain we are all sharing. The picture begins simply. In the fall 1966, the beginning of my sophomore year, I began the 2-semester journey of that wonderful requirement in the day of Bible 101, 102, the Old followed by the New Testaments, as they were called in that era. I chose Lou as the professor because I'd heard from classmates and other students that though Professor Hammann was depicted as very tough, his courses very hard and demanding, he was also very engaging as a prof. These fellow students' opinions ran the gamut. Some urged never do the Bible courses or any other with him, but many others, even with some hesitation and reluctance, readily admitted that he was a great prof to have a course with. So on to Lou for the Bible, 101, 102, and to a large degree, the rest is history. When I arrived at Gettysburg, I never thought I would want to study religion. I didn't even know the Bible was required until my first fall registration. But Bible with Lou opened the floodgates for me in terms of being drawn into 4 subsequent religion courses with him. That curiosity and his encouragement led me to 2 degrees in religion and divinity. That graduate academic foundation then led to the greatest gift he gave me, the inquiry in my doctoral work about the moral voice of college and university presidents and research and writing about the college in America, incorporating issues of ethics, religion, and how religion shapes us and our institutions, the theme of a current book in the works. This trek and saga that Lou inspired, that he truly caused, has provided a lifelong and blessed imprint on me and on my life. Lou's hand was indelible in making me the teacher and writer that I have been blessed to be. Then there was the moment in the fall 1968 when I was applying as a conscientious objector with the draft board. I approached Lou about writing on my behalf. As I recall it, the letter was remarkably comprehensive with nice touches for the audience of intentional imperiousness of the whys and wherefores of my stand on the draft and war. It was a classic of more information than they ever would have wanted or maybe even were happy to have. But Lou's support and being by my side was so crucial in the face of the grave anxieties of that time in my life. At about the same time, toward the end of junior year, Lou and I hatched a most intriguing idea. He was always interested in intriguing ideas. What we cooked up was that, in a reiteration of me for his world religions course, I would function as a teaching assistant. The idea was simple. I would enroll in his course as a student for the second time. We tweaked it into some variety of an independent study with the registrar. Unbeknownst to fellow classmates, I served as a Confederate. My task, a true treat, was in an unscripted fashion to feed questions, to make certain that discussions and conversations would move along, always prodding Lou's students to think more and more deeply, and to open the door for Lou to expand the points he was making. I am told that for years, decades after, Lou would regale anyone in listening range with his joy and pleasure at what we conspired to do and so deftly pulled off. Then many years later, my dear spouse, Janet, and I decided to set up an endowment with Gettysburg in Lou's name and honor, the funds designated for the purchase of books on religion for the Musselman Library. I remember the day I called to tell him what we were going to do. He was in tears almost immediately, and I could hardly speak further for what seemed like an eternity. There we were, two grown men crying on the phone. Somewhat later, Janet and I got together with Lou and Patricia when they were on a visit in the Boston area together to join together in celebration. A while after, Lou and I shared a lovely public reception in the library, thanks to Robin Wagner, to celebrate his legacy in this endowment with his colleagues and friends and others at Gettysburg. What didn't Lou do? Oh, probably a lot of things, as with any of us mortals, time ever our enemy. But wow, what he did. Loving, dedicated husband and father to marvelous children, despite the horrible tragedy and the death of a daughter well before her time. Professor and teacher to thousands of Gettysburg students. A faculty leader of all manner of curricular, student life, and many other initiatives, from making the study of religion vastly more contemporary and wide-ranging to the brief but wonderful experiment of the January term. Coach of hundreds of varsity soccer-playing students. Faithful church person, preacher, and congregant. With spouse and compatriot Patricia, a man committed to social action and political change. Maybe it's all been said, but Lou was intellectually driven and curious. His life, a world of ideas. He was empathetic, and he gave and gave and gave. He had a sense of humor and savoir-faire about life and living. In any era, a mensch. These are merely a few drips in the reservoir of delight and honor about Lou's life that we deeply, albeit with buckets of grief, celebrate today. Farewell and Godspeed to a dear friend, teacher, and man. So thank you to Steve, of course, for sharing those remarks. Now I'd like to ask our other speakers to come up in the order of the program and introduce themselves. And we'll start first with Barbara Shames, class of 1971.
Good morning. As Janet said, my name is Barbara Shames. I graduated from Gettysburg College in 1971. I met my husband Mark at Gettysburg in 1969 in the cafeteria line, his very first day of school. I was a junior at the time. We became best friends. With Mark's desire to go to law school and his interest in history and world religions, he eventually decided to become a religion major. I was a math major and had a minor in religion, so it was inevitable that we would end up in Professor Hammann's religion classes. Those classes were hard to get into those days. They were the first to fill up. Mark and I cemented our relationship in Professor Hammann's 1971 January term class, Mass Media Christianity. Nobody but Lou Hammann would be studying Christianity in the media in 1971. By the way, we both got A's. Our romance progressed, and in the winter of that year, we were planning our wedding. With Mark being Jewish and me being Catholic, we couldn't find anyone to marry us. One day we were sitting in Lou's office, as we affectionately called him by then, chatting him, telling him about the obstacles we were facing trying to get married. We couldn't find a priest, we couldn't find a rabbi to perform the ceremony. After a few seconds of thought, Lou looked up and said, "I'll marry you." We both looked at each other. "Really?" He said, "Absolutely. It will be a great vacation for Patricia and I." And so it was on August 19th, 1972, that Father Lou, as our Christian guests called him, and Rabbi Lou, as our Jewish guests called him, joined Mark and I in wedded bliss. Lou's blessings that day formed a lifelong relationship between us, filled with letters, phone calls, visits, numerous political and religious discussions, and genuine love and respect for one another. After we were married, I had graduated and Mark was still in school. We spent many a Sunday afternoon visiting Lou and Patricia at their home in Ortana. We inevitably ended up picking apples during apple season with Lou, Patricia, and Rebecca, who was still at home at the time. Those visits made such an impact on our lives as we sat around discussing current events and our philosophies of life. We called those Sunday afternoons Life 101. Lou was a great listener and had the uncanny ability to distill our conversations down to what was most important in life. Be a good citizen, stay involved in your local community, value family and friends, and never stop learning. These are the lessons he taught us, and he put those lessons into practice every day. I remember when Hundredfold Farm was just a glimmer in Lou's eye. It was 2006, and Lou took Mark and I out to the farm and explained the whole concept to us. He was so proud and excited about what this farm would become and represent in his life and the lives of those who bought into the farm. At that time, there were no houses on the land. Their water system had just been designed by their son-in-law, and the installation had begun. Lou was so passionate about the environmental sustainability of this project. He had found a new passion at the age of 77. Remarkable. And he was learning, educating himself, and he was teaching us that day. The last visit Mark and I had with Lou and Patricia was in June of 2018. We drove Lou back to his home after a reunion lunch. Lou loved to attend those lunches to interact and take pictures with his former students. We spent the time talking about family and friends, because near the end, it all comes down to that, doesn't it? Family and friends and life relationships. Lou was such an important part of our lives. Not only had he married us, but he had become a staple in our lives over the years. And we were just 2 of 50 years of students. I'm humbled and honored to have had the privilege to speak today on behalf of so many students who benefited from Lou's teachings and counsel. He challenged us to open our minds to new ways of thinking and open our hearts to people from all walks of life. He made a significant contribution to so many lives. It just tells you the kind of person that he was. The last time I spoke to Lou was after my husband Mark passed away. He was so distraught. But we ended up reminiscing about all the good times we had shared over the years. And if I may end sharing a personal vision that I have quite often right now, I see Mark and Lou sitting around a campfire in heaven, sipping their bourbon and gin, discussing and solving the world's problems from above. They have a unique view right now. It always brings a smile to my face. Rest in peace, Lou. You certainly deserve it.
Good morning. It still is morning. I have a couple more minutes here. Thanks for attending this celebration of life for the late Louis J. Hammann III. My name is Buzz Myers, and in light of all of your relationships with Lou, I'm a relative newbie. I only knew Lou for 36 years. We were colleagues in the religion department for 10 years until Lou retired from full-time teaching in 1996, and then for another 11 years as Lou taught part-time in the religion and philosophy departments. In 2012, Lou published a book entitled Religion, a Mosaic. And Lou had this to say about colleagues in that book. So if you'll indulge me for a moment, let me read a couple of sentences from Lou's 2012 book. Lou wrote, "It is quite usual for religion to be traced to two Latin words. One is the prefix re, which means something like back or again, as in return. The other and more important root is legare, a Latin verb whose general meaning is to bind or tie. This root appears in many English words: college, colleague, ligament, ligature, legation, ally, lien, oblige, and the like. But what do all of these words and terms have in common? Colleagues are people bound together by some common commitment or obligation. A college is a collection of colleagues. A ligament ties or binds things together. Some may remember that old Christian hymn, "Blessed be the tie that binds." My friends, that passage is so Lou. Anyone who knows Lou knows that he loved word derivations. And what he saw in those words, colleague and college and ligament, is that they share an essential meaning of being tied together by some commonality. In an intellectual history course I took in college many years ago, my professor made the point that creative genius is not coming up with new ideas, but with making new connections between seemingly disparate entities. And that, my friends, was the creative genius of Lou Hammann. He had this uncanny ability to recognize commonalities and build connections between seemingly disparate entities. And so in a world where academic departments are too often intellectual silos, Lou reached out beyond the religion department to help found area studies and global studies, to support interdisciplinary studies, to create the management department out of the economics department. But Lou's efforts didn't end with the academic departments. He regularly extended his services to the admissions office, to the development office, and as you all know, so frequently to the alumni office. Lou was fond of saying, "I'm a company man." And that's why he did anything and everything that the college asked of him and more. In our department, which was largely white and Anglo-Saxon and Christian, Lou was the first one to offer courses in Buddhism and in Islam. And he did more than teach about Islam. He became closely associated with the Ahmadiyyat Islamic community in central Pennsylvania. And because of what was arguably the most popular course on campus during his career, which you've already heard about, Religion from the Center to the Fringe, Lou established relations with members of the Mormon Church, with Jehovah's Witnesses, and with Seventh-day Adventists. And this ordained United Church of Christ minister couldn't stay within the confines of his own denomination. Why, he served for more than a decade as an interim at the Fairfield Mennonite Church. He was a regular speaker at Presbyterian churches and at the Unitarian Universal churches in Gettysburg and in Harrisburg, and he was involved with the Quaker meeting on campus. And Lou has also connected his campus life with his civic responsibilities. As you've already heard, he served proudly on the local boards of the Hammann Home for Boys and on the Gettysburg Hospital Board and on Project Gettysburg Lyon. And as you also know, he related his classroom career to an athletic career, as he was very, very popular and very foundational in the soccer program at Gettysburg College and in this area. And in his later years, he did more than talk about the environmental crisis. He and Patricia, with the help of their daughter Sandra and son-in-law Bill Hartzell, established Hundredfold Farm in nearby Ortana, which was created to demonstrate that persons can live ecologically conscious lives in community, and to show that religion and politics do mix. Lou and Patricia were active in the Gettysburg chapter of Americans for Democracy. Lou even succeeded in connecting his academic career to the business world, which I'm told for 11 months before I ever arrived, Lou operated a fish market in town. And all this time, he was doing so. He was being a faithful and devoted husband to Patricia, the wife of 69 years, and a supportive and loving father to his 5 talented and accomplished daughters. All of this is to say that Lou never stayed in his lane. He was all over the map, making new, novel, powerful connections with other people, with new ideas, with differing traditions, with multiple institutions. And these many connections of seemingly disparate entities that Lou established formed an intricate web that enticed and entranced students. In Lou, students saw integrity and honesty in action. In Lou, students witnessed what it meant to be tolerant of those with whom one disagrees. In Lou, students saw a lifelong learner, an educator par excellence who was willing to be taught by others. Laura Parham, class of 1993, makes that point in a letter she wrote to Lou when Lou retired in the 1990s. I'd like to take this opportunity to tell you, Professor Hammann, what an honor it was to learn from you and in many cases with you. Despite your years of experience and obvious intelligence, you still maintain the capacity to learn from others, especially your students. Your integrity as a person, reflected in this and other ways, was evident upon my earliest contact with you. Lou was my colleague for many years, but he was also my mentor, not necessarily by what he told me, but what he showed me. And what Lou Hammann showed me is, through his example, is that it is all about our students. Lou was dedicated and devoted to making his students better thinkers, better listeners, better citizens of this world, and students knew that Lou's number one priority was the students. You hear that from Karen Schweitzer, another graduate, the class of 1996, who wrote, "Professor Hammann, you challenged me to think deeper and harder than I ever knew was possible. As a professor, you didn't tell me what to think, you taught us how to think. Thank you for challenging me to always look a little bit deeper, to always reach a little bit farther." The care and concern that Lou lavished on his students was never forgotten, and all of you here today are testimony to that fact. I was reminded of that yesterday during the Alumni Awards ceremony in the ballroom when Terry Hannah Lannon, class of 1981, dedicated her Meritorious Service Award to the late Lou Hammann, her advisor and mentor of 41 years ago. He's the one professor that alums never forgot. He's the one that alums regularly asked to see when they return to campus. That, my friends, is the legacy of Lou Hammann. His legacy is not to be found on bookshelves in libraries or in journals online. Lou's legacy is the profound impact he had on literally thousands of students during his decades-long tenure at Gettysburg College, some of whom are our speakers today, and some of who are in attendance at this service this morning. And so the final lesson that Lou taught me, by example, is what it means to do great work. Lou was the epitome of Gettysburg great. Lou did great work, and for that, I and many of persons related to the college are forever grateful. My field of study is biblical studies. I'm the one now that teaches the Hebrew Bible and New Testament courses that many of you suffered through. And so I often find in the Bible texts that seem to apply to present-day life. One of my favorite passages in the Hebrew Bible is the story of the death of Elijah the prophet. Just before his death, in 2 Kings chapter 2, Elijah said to his protege Elisha, "Tell me what I may do for you before I'm taken from you." In one of the most moving passages of the entire Bible, Elisha pays his mentor the highest of compliments. "Please, Father Elijah, let me inherit a double portion of your spirit." In other words, Elisha asks to be Elijah times 2. And that, my friends, is the prayer for all of us here today. May we all inherit a double share of Lou Hammann's spirit. Amen.
Good afternoon. Am I right? We're going on and on. My name is Will Lane, and I have an unusual position in that I'm a longtime member of the local community. I was a student at Gettysburg College, and I ended up teaching there. Strangely enough, I still am. Through all of that, I feel like I've known Lou Hammann. So it's really an honor to be asked to say a few words about his impact in our local community and in the larger national community of activists concerned with peace, social justice, environmental wisdom. But to say a few words about Lou Hammann means to also say a few words about Pat Hammann. They were a team, as Lou himself said more than once over the years. And what they stood for and what they did they most often said and did together. They understood the importance of showing up again and again and again. And more often than not, they showed up together. Now, the list of Lou's commitments in the community is very long, as we've already realized, you know. And so I'm going to sort of skip through some of my listings of those commitments, but it's clear that, as Buzz just described it, Lou did not stay in his lane. Soccer, fish markets, and I had the honor, along with my partner Todd Budd, of being the one that was hired to do the counters and cabinets in the new fish market. And having already known Lou, I couldn't believe what we were doing. You know, the man clearly had a sense of adventure. And really did not stay in his lane. But beyond that, his work and Pat's work with the Interfaith Center for Peace and Justice over the years, serving on that board, and always being the one that was ready to step out, say during the Reagan years with the nuclear freeze movement. He would be the one ready to hold the sign, carry the banner, and show up. At the same time that he was on the hospital board, Huffman Homes, SCAP, South Central Community Action Program, he was everywhere in the community over many, many years. And they stood for things that people may not have been quite ready to hear about. They stood for international debt relief. They stood with the Palestinian people. They stood with the people of Nicaragua. And in 2004, Lou and Pat were recognized for some of that work by the Peacemaker Award from the Interfaith Center for Peace and Justice. After many years of showing up and being a critical part of our community life together. But I think, you know, maybe a couple of stories get at the essence of this remarkable man and woman better than just a list of all the things they were involved in. So I thought about it, and, you know, a couple of things came to mind, actually way more than a couple, but, you know, time is short. And in one of these memories, I find myself sometime in the late 1980s, early 1990s, sitting in a bar with Lou and Pat. And they had called together a few people who had professed an interest in founding an intentional community dedicated to environmental and social sustainability. They both had a serious case of the twinkles in their eyes, I have to say. Little did I know, but they were already founding Hundredfold Farm, in their minds at least, a co-housing community that continues to flourish today near Cashtown. But nearly a decade of hassling with township officials and reluctant state regulators lay ahead before that dream could be realized. The thing was, it was hard for the township to imagine why 14 families might choose to live along a single street in the middle of 80 acres. Around here, especially back then, we like to chop things up into 5-acre lots, each with a well and septic tank of its own. You want to do what with the gray water? The regulators cried out. Pump it through a greenhouse? We just didn't do that in Pennsylvania. But Lou and Pat kept on, and wouldn't you know, in the brand new century, again and again, I had the pleasure of bringing my students out for a tour of that community and its awesome greenhouse. Lou loved explaining the greenhouse, how the plants worked perfectly to purify the water. And the students, I have to say, loved Lou, too. Then there was the work of Lou and Pat with Doris Haddock, Granny D, as she was more popularly known, and the Alliance for American Democracy. The issue was campaign finance reform, and Granny D had walked across America to demand action from Congress. Lou and Pat joined her protests in Washington and had the pleasure of getting arrested in the Capitol Rotunda. According to Pat, Lou hit it off well with the police. A female officer, in fact, she said recently, asked jokingly if she could be included in Lou's mugshot. Unfortunately, Lou tripped on the steps getting into the bus for the ride to jail and got a nasty bang on his head, but lived, thankfully, to tell the tale and continue along with Pat to advocate for campaign finance reform. As many have said already, Lou Hammann was a teacher deeply committed to his students. But he was also a faculty member who understood that the community was also his classroom. John the Baptizer had his wilderness. Lou had us. Socrates had Athens. Lou had his classroom, but also us. A community slow to move at times, quick to misunderstand. But Lou, the gadfly, didn't mind delivering a zinger now and then, even among friends. He kept us moving. He kept us thinking. Above all, he showed up again and again, and we are grateful for his life among us, a life well lived for sure. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Marnie Jones, graduate of Gettysburg College in 1975. The final time I saw Lou and Patricia was just last fall. It was almost 50 years to the day earlier that I, as a first-term freshman, enrolled in religion and fiction. I had no idea that the man at the front of the room would evolve from being my professor, to my mentor, to my friend, to a rare kind of family, the one you choose. Family isn't always blood, Maya Angelou wrote. It's the people in your life who want you in theirs. I count Lou Hammann as one of the greatest blessings of my entire life. He helped heal the hole in my heart after the loss of my father when I was 7. He was an especially gifted teacher, and I want to highlight just 2 of those gifts. I didn't realize it at the time, but Lou was making us better humans. First, by his stance with regard to course content, but second, by his relationship with us. What was distinctive about a Lou Hammann course, it seems to me, is that he taught a wide variety of religious traditions from the inside of each one. In Religion from the Center to the Fringe, his gift of speaking with insight and authority from within central and fringe perspectives was almost dizzying to students. His stunning ability to inhabit other perspectives helped us understand how other people viewed the world. That helped us make the lateral intellectual move of questioning our own assumptions. I took every course Lou Hammann offered during my 4 years at Gettysburg, including a January term course on Black and Jewish literature and an independent study exploring the intersection of theology and news in the Christian Science Monitor. By the way, I was an English major. Eventually, other students knew that I knew the professor well. Walking down Gladfelter's stairs after his Buddhism class, someone rushed up behind me and said, Marnie, is Lou a Buddhist? I knew Lou well because I, Episcopalian though I was raised, attended Fairfield Mennonite Church for 4 years when I was in Gettysburg. One summer, Lou and I worked side by side at a local orchard, painting and supervising cherry picking. Lou was earning additional money for Mary's music lessons. I was just earning money. That summer, I began having lunch or dinner at the Hammonds' home. One night, I went home with a kitten from the blind cat's litter and Rebecca's thanks. After my graduation, our lives braided together despite the distances. Lou officiated at my first wedding. He helped me prepare for graduate school by teaching me Latin by tape recordings that we would mail back and forth. It was the late 1970s equivalent of distance learning. He read my completed PhD dissertation, which he must have asked for and didn't need to do. Later, both Lou and Patricia were great readers of a draft of a biography I published. In January 2001, on Inauguration Day, Patricia, Lou, and I, and many others, protested Bush v. Gore outside the U.S. Supreme Court. I've enjoyed a lifetime of wonderful conversations with multiple visits to Gettysburg, as well as time together with the Hammonds in New Hampshire, Philadelphia, Chicago, and Jacksonville. I can still hear Lou saying, "If you aren't confused, you aren't paying attention." I've become, obviously, I'm paying more and more attention because I'm more and more confused. We kept in touch by phone, email, and letter. And Lou articulated the second gift I want to highlight in a letter. In the late 70s, he wrote, I'm quoting him, "The most important facet of human experience are relationships built on trust, honesty, and commitment." He said he'd been looking at student letter of recommendation letters that he'd been writing. And he said, I'm quoting him again, he was trying to persuade others, people he did not know, that the value he saw in a student, that their particular skills, virtues, and abilities would be worth something only because they had value for me. He italicized that. That's what Lou made clear to his students. We had value to him. His letter continued, this is a quote, "What I really value in students emerges out of our relationship. It's what transpired between us. They trusted me to value them. They trusted me to recommend their virtues and their strengths. They trusted me to be honest." For almost 40 years now, I've been a professor of English literature. Lou Hammond's life, his gifts as a teacher and a human, utterly transformed my life. I took his lived experience into my own courses. When students tell me they value the radical respect I pay them, I think about the ways Lou Hammann impacts people he never even knew.
Thank you all for coming. This talk is actually for my sisters, my fabulous, beloved sisters. Diane, Sandy, Mary, our beautiful Rebecca. We have an auxiliary backup sister, Megan. I'm not sure I can do this without crying, but I am my father's daughter, so maybe I can. He was the one that did these things for everybody else, graduations, weddings, funerals. And he did it with a grace and insights that were unique. I'm not him, and this is particularly hard, but I'll try. Just bear with me. First of all, I can't talk about my father without talking about my mother and my father. The gift of those parents is beyond words. I remember, even as a small child, I knew how much my mother loved our father. I asked her once in our kitchen with the red counter, when I was about 5, who do you love more, me, Diane, and Sandy, or Daddy? And she said without hesitation, your father. I already knew that. It startled me to hear it, but I knew that. I remember a picture of my mother at her wedding, looking up at my father with adoring eyes. And I remember another picture taken about 30 years later of the two of them standing in a doorway, and my mother was looking up at my father. And I realized with a start that it was exactly the same look. That was my parents. Those two pictures, but with so many things in between and added that it makes you realize what a miracle life is. My father was my hero, and that I also learned from my mother. I saw how she revered her own father. That was part of the fabric of my life. And since my father was deeply thoughtful, humane, and wise, with a reasonableness and a remarkable intelligence, imbued with spirituality and deep humanity, her example was easy to follow. My father is my hero. I remember my father telling someone who once asked him about his profession that in reality, his children are the center of his life. That no matter what anyone's career, your children are still the center of your life. He had a great career. This college made it possible for him to make a living doing something he loved. They made it possible for him to give something uniquely valuable to the world. But his children were still the center of his world. And I know that he was right. So is mine. He was a great, great teacher. I've looked for and found many great teachers in my life because of his example. And he's still the best one I've ever found. My nephews took some of his courses at Gettysburg, and I remember going to one of his classes with Ben. And my father would lecture. He would explain and ruminate, expound, list all those things that make a great lecture. And you'd listen avidly because he was exciting and engaging when he talked. And then at the end of class, maybe a minute before the bell, after he'd given you all this information, so many ideas, he'd put both hands flat on his desk and deliver a sentence that made it all fall into place. It was fabulous. He pulled insights out of the air every time he talked, and he talked a lot. At classes, churches, weddings, funerals, conferences, and every time you were left with some unique insight. He was a deeply educated man. He read, and read and read and read and read. I can still see him every evening in our old house, sitting at the end of the brown couch by the monkey lamp, reading. My father was also one of the most even-tempered people I've ever known. And he was kind, deeply kind. I think he got that from his mother, Mamam, Grandmom. She loved directly. She gave children her full and direct attention and recognized each one as unique and special. He did that every time he talked to his students. He did it every time he talked to anyone. He was also one of the most reasonable people I ever knew. He always stayed calm and rational. Of course, we didn't always do that. I remember him saying to his sometimes hysterical, weeping daughters, "Okay, go wash your face in cold water and come and sit down. Now, what is the problem? We can fix this." And I will tell you that we almost always could, even when it took a little help from him and my mother. If it couldn't be fixed, his sympathy and empathy made it bearable. He did that for a lot of people, more than we'll ever know. I know that because I was there at least a few of the times that he did. I will tell you, however, that there was one thing that did get him annoyed, really annoyed, and that was putting up a Christmas tree. He'd tie them from every corner of the room, and they always fell over. I remember one Christmas when the ropes zigzagged around the entire family room, and that damn tree still fell over. And what did he end up doing after he retired? Well, he was a political radical because of my mom. Because they paid attention to the world and cared about it deeply. But you all know about that, since they did finally let him out of jail. But what else did he do? He bought a Christmas tree farm, for crying out loud. Well, it's way more than a Christmas tree farm, as you also all know. But that's another story. My parents were believers in dreams. My mother was a mother of dreams. Hundredfold, my films, Philip's CDs, Mary's programs, there's so many things they believed in because they mattered to other people. And my parents' generosity made so many dreams possible. My parents believed in dreams. They made a lot of them come true for a lot of people in a lot of ways. And my father believed in his students. He was interested in his students. He took every one of them seriously, the same way he took his children seriously. So what is a teacher? He brings people together. He teaches how to and why people connect with each other. My parents are political radicals. I know this isn't the place for politics, but I'm my mother's daughter. My father pulled insights out of everyday events. I was just listening to the news on the way here yesterday. So here's one from me. Those with more than their fair share are setting the rest of us against each other. Let's not go there. Let's stay connected. As E.M. Forster, the great writer, said, just connect. Okay, I'll stop. When I was in first year university, I wanted to go to a music festival. It was expensive. But my parents, as I said, believed in dreams, so they said yes. As you know, we lived in the middle of Orchard Company, and Marnie got that little part of the story wrong. You were painting the migrant camps in order to send me to the Temple Festival. At the time, the big piece that I was playing was Beethoven's Waldstein Sonata, and my father loved that piece. He had a recording of me playing it, and he told me that the whole time they were painting, he and Marnie listened to it for inspiration. I love Beethoven. His music has always spoken to me. So much of it is a kind of pleading with fate, followed inevitably by acceptance. His Pathetique Sonata is the purest expression of grief ever penned, but it is minus despair. I think that what Beethoven's music says, all of it, one way or another, is that the human experience matters. No matter what it is, grief, anger, joy, sorrow, it matters. And that's what my father knew. That's why he studied and read and thought about the things he taught and talked about. The human experience matters. He believed that. Remember what else he said, too, though. If you're not confused, you're not paying attention. So finally, I would like to play the slow movement of Beethoven's Waldstein for my father. Hey, Toad, this is for you.
So on the count of 3, all say Lou. You ready? 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Good afternoon. It still is. First of all, thank you to all the previous speakers for keeping their remarks within the limits, because little do you know that I have no limit. So, buckle up. Here we go. Again, thank you all for being here. And a special thank you to Chaplain Bright, Janet, and there's a new list since I've written this, Bayard, Ray, Steve, Barbara, Buzz, Will, Marnie, Tricia. And for the many others that have sent notes and letters, for your sincere and eloquent and heartfelt sentiments. And especially to Halida, Lindsay, Tricia, Mary, for your beautiful musical tributes. This is overwhelming and quite a lot to follow. So where do I begin? My name is Kenneth Robert Hammann, known to many of you as Kenny or Uncle Kenny. I am one of the brothers of Louis John Hammann III, known to many of you as Dr. Hammann, Professor Hammann, Coach, Lou, Dad, and to our sons, Unca New, and your very select few, Toad. I am the youngest of the 3 sons of Margaret and Louis, known to some of you as Mom and Pop. Our parents and our brother Fred, known to many of you as Bud, left us more than 30 years ago. That left Lou and me to represent our generation. And I am now the senior member of that generation. As was made clear by the speakers before me, many of you and most of you here today know about Lou and his many and varied roles as teacher, scholar, author, mentor, activist, pioneer, soccer coach, husband and father, and as someone who taught generations of Gettysburgians the true meaning of open-mindedness, and someone, as we've heard, who could challenge you in a way that could alter your perspective on life. Well, that's quite a lot. I had a very limited insight and experience. Let me tell you what I know. To put things in perspective, Lou was 18 years older than me, and Fred, our other sibling, was 13 years older than me. My brothers were born during a much different time than me. Their early years were very difficult as they were raised during the Great Depression and World War II. To further complicate things, at the vulnerable ages of 13 and 8, their father was taken from them for 2 years to serve in the Navy in World War II in the Pacific. Given the age differences between us, my brothers and their wives were more like aunts and uncles to me. And their children, they each had 5, were more like cousins. Things were different for me, as I was often reminded by a not-so-gentle punch on the shoulder and maybe a not-so-gentle slap on the back of my head. You see, we were brothers, after all, and brothers will be brothers. Not long after Dad returned from World War II, he purchased a seafood business. And I was born. I had things and opportunities my brothers did not. For example, they would often chide me that while my clothes came from boutique stores in Baltimore, they had to share the same T-shirt. Vacations for them were infrequent and to exotic places. For me, they were frequent to many locations in Florida and occasionally the Caribbean. However, although I was raised in a much more upscale environment and I had more things than my brothers, the one thing I was missing were my brothers. Lou left first, bound for college, when I was 3 months old, followed soon after by Fred when he joined the Navy. They were already gone before I realized what it was like and what it meant to have brothers. Not long after I graduated from high school, Lou had 4 college degrees, and they each had 5 children. Unfortunately for Fred, however, he did not escape soon enough. He had to take me, at the insistence of our mother, his 3 to 4-year-old brother, on dates in my stroller. There were, despite the age differences and the differences in our circumstances, times that were special with my brothers and their families. Every 4th of July, our father's birthday, we would gather at Fred's house to eat steamed crabs, drink American beer, and set off fireworks. Many times a year, we would gather in Gettysburg, often to pick apples, which I think everybody must have done when they visited my brother, in the orchard behind his house, or maybe to celebrate a holiday or a birthday. There were several times as a youngster that I spent 2 weeks in the summer with my brother and his family. But you see, as a city boy, I was more accustomed to concrete sidewalks than gravel driveways, and I was very unfamiliar with rural life. However, I do remember actually enjoying myself. I played with my cousins, milked a goat named Becky, and made raw goat's milk ice cream in freezer trays, climbed trees, and shot arrows at random objects with a bow that Lou made for me out of a tree branch. I do, however, remember there were times when I had trouble occupying myself because they did not have a television. I was into Howdy Doody and Superman. And they were into things, well, I wasn't quite sure what they were into. Things like talking to each other, reading real books and not comic books, and playing and listening to a kind of music with which I was totally unfamiliar. It did not sound like Elvis. However, as Lou and I grew older and we became closer, as the age gap just didn't seem to matter so much, I was coming into my own, starting my career and my family. But in fact, there was one event that I will never forget that proved to me that my brother was beginning to recognize me as something other than that little kid that would visit them in the summers. I was 50 years old when Lou invited me to his 50th high school reunion. If you do the math, you begin to realize that one of the difficulties about having a much younger brother, much more serious than having to take me on dates, was my unfortunate timing. I was born the day after Lou graduated from high school. So rather than be present to celebrate the graduation of her son, the first member of our family to get a high school diploma, our mother was in the hospital crying, despite having just given birth to a precious and adorable little boy. When Lou invited me to his reunion, I said I would accept the invitation on one condition, that I be allowed to speak. He agreed. I took the opportunity, long overdue and in front of all of his high school friends, to apologize for being born and for disrupting one of the most special days in his young life. Rest assured that he took it in the way it was intended, a little tongue-in-cheek. As in all families, each of us plays roles specific to our talents, our ages, our experiences, and how we are perceived. In our family, as has been said, when there was a wedding to perform, a funeral to conduct, a toast, a prayer, or a eulogy to be given, the family always called for the preacher or the professor. And you can bet that was not me, but it was Lou. I never felt slighted. He was good at it, and he had earned it. So while this is unfamiliar territory for me, I've had the opportunity to listen to several eulogies given by my brother. And as he always did, I will try to leave you with a couple of profound thoughts and insights. To do that, I want to share two quotes. First, the highest and most profound compliment you could receive in our family came from our mother, Margaret, Mama. And she often used it to describe her oldest son, and occasionally Fred and me. If she were here today, many of you would be the recipient of her affection and esteem. Nonetheless, if you accomplished something special, if you meant something special to Mom, she had this quote, but there was an irony in this quote. Because as I said, Lou and Patricia didn't own a television. So Mom would take your face in her hands and she'd say, "You are too much for TV." We never really asked her what she meant by that. But you can always be assured that you were in the best of company. Second, there's a bit of wisdom that Lou shared often. And it came from their youngest daughter, Rebecca. Near the end of her too short life, she comforted and reassured her parents by saying, "Life goes on." Yes, life goes on. And I believe that bit of wisdom applies to my brother. As many of you have said much more eloquently and in much more detail than me, he has left quite a legacy. Thousands of enlightened students, many Gettysburg and youth soccer players, and countless others he has touched with his unique insights and perspective on life. And with Patricia, his life partner for nearly 70 years, they created an exceptional family. And he and Patricia shared unwavering values, beliefs, and selfless activism as together they worked tirelessly and steadfastly to make this a better society, a better country, and a better world. So in conclusion, if I could have had one last conversation with my brother, I would have assured him I was actually glad that I was born and that I could call him my brother.
From life's first cry to our final breath, you are our God. The only sorrow of the grave is that we cannot worship you in this grace. Let those of us who remain testify of your goodness, faithfulness, as long as we live. We thank you for a home beyond this life, where goodbyes are